So, friends, you have undoubtedly seen the reporting about how Donald Trump threatened the lives of 6 members of Congress, 2 senators, and 4 representatives. Why? Well, those 6 elected officials created a video that I considered a public service announcement. It was entirely unremarkable, at least to those of us who are military veterans or currently serving in the military, because all these 6 government officials, these elected officials, said was that military members have an obligation to disobey unlawful orders. Why is that unremarkable? Because that's what I was taught in officer basic training. And that's what I was taught again at the Army's JAG school before I entered active duty. We are duty bound to, 1, obey lawful orders, but more importantly, to disobey unlawful orders. I found that public service announcement video important, but unremarkable, and entirely accurate. But Donald Trump took umbrage, and he said that what those 6 members of Congress did was seditious. They committed crimes that were deserving of death, and he reposted something that I read as a command. He reposted a post that said, "Hang them, George Washington would." So friends, I just had the opportunity to sit down with and interview someone who is the perfect person to talk about given these recent developments. His name is Frank Rosenblatt. Frank is not only a law professor who is an expert on military law, he's also a retired JAG officer, retiring as a lieutenant colonel, and perhaps most importantly, for purposes of today's video, he's the president of the National Institute of Military Justice, which runs something called the Orders Project. What is the Orders Project? It's a resource where military members can call, can contact, can reach out to, and get real-time information from subject matter experts, from attorneys, on the issue of whether a particular order is lawful or unlawful. They can talk about their responsibility as military members to disobey unlawful orders and how they can go about doing that safely, protecting themselves and their interests. So the Orders Project is such an incredibly important resource at this moment in time to help protect our military members, because the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces is putting them in an impossibly difficult situation and frankly putting them in harm's way. So I hope you enjoy this extended conversation with Frank Rosenblatt, president of the National Institute of Military Justice. All right, everybody, welcome back. Great to see you today. I have a guest who could not be more timely given what we have experienced over the past 24 hours or so. Frank Rosenblatt, let me give him a proper introduction. He is an associate professor at Mississippi College School of Law, where he teaches, among other things, constitutional law, international criminal law, and military law. Frank is a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel JAG. He served as both a trial counsel, which is what we call prosecutors in the military, and a TDS attorney, trial defense service attorney. That's what we call criminal defense attorneys in the military. He also served as an infantry officer, I saw, before he started work as an Army JAG. He's presently the president of the National Institute of Military Justice, NIMJ. And most pertinently for our conversation today, the National Institute of Military Justice runs something called
the Orders Project. And I'm going to have him explain what the Orders Project is, but not to bury the lead. It is a service that gives members of the military an opportunity to contact them and get information in real time about, for example, what is a lawful military order and what is an unlawful military order. So, needless to say, this could not be a more timely conversation given what we just experienced, which we'll talk about in a minute. But first of all, Frank, thank you so much for jumping on and being willing to kind of share your insight and your expertise on this issue.
Well, thanks a lot, Glenn. It's a pleasure. You've been a thought leader in this area, and so really an honor to be with you today.
So I have to start, Frank, and I wish I didn't, with where we are right now with 6 members of Congress, 2 senators and 4 representatives, 5 of whom are military veterans. 1 is a former CIA officer who also worked at the Department of Defense. They did what I considered a non-controversial, straightforward public service announcement video saying that, reminding military members of their obligation to disobey unlawful orders. That's something I learned back in officer basic training and again at the JAG school before I started active duty as an Army JAG prosecutor. And I thought it was, it was important that this message, be reinforced. But, I saw the video and thought, well, we already know that as veterans, former military members. And then our president, Donald Trump, lost his mind because here is some of what he posted in response to that video from those 6 members of Congress. He said, quote, "It's called seditious behavior at the highest levels. Each one of these traitors to our country should be arrested and put on trial. Their words cannot be allowed to stand. We won't have a country anymore. An example must be set." And he signed it, President DJT, but he wasn't done. He went on to post that this is seditious behavior punishable by death. And then, Frank, he sent out something that I read as a command. He reposted something somebody else had posted, and it said, "Hang them, George Washington would." I have to ask, first of all, how does all of this land with you?
Well, I'm not a political commentator, and so that's not really my area. But there are 2 things about this that struck out at me. The first is that the message of disobedience of unlawful orders and the requirement that soldiers obey lawful orders are cannot be repeated often enough. These are important, especially as we are in a time where we are using the military in what's safe to say are some boundary pushing ways. We've never had anything before like the deployments of the National Guard into U.S. cities. These are legally contestable events right now. I wouldn't really trust anyone who said these are all definitely illegal or definitely all legal, because the fact is the legal landscape of them changes by the day. And similarly, with the boat strikes that have been occurring in the Caribbean, this is also boundary pushing. Unlike in previous uses of military force, where there was a definitive congressional authorization, there was a basis for the use of force in international law. Right now, some people on both sides are said, well, we need a little more information. We're scratching our heads, and this looks to us to at least be legally contestable. And so the temperature is definitely raised, especially after the president's comments. He's not just the president; he's also the commander in chief of the armed forces who made these statements. So we are paying close attention to these things. We're at ordersproject.com, and thanks for the introduction on that.
So let's start with, and I couldn't help but get to those outrageous posts by a president/commander-in-chief suggesting that members of a co-equal branch of government who were elected by their constituents to represent them in Washington, who published a video that was truthful, that was accurate, and that is so important and is part of what's ingrained in us as military members, would suggest that it was sedition, punishable by death, and, quote, hang them, George Washington would. I mean, he always seems to be capable of finding new ways to outrage us, maybe just as a distraction. But when the language is so reckless and so dangerous, and for example, Senator Alyssa Slotkin has already gone on air saying she's received thousands of death threats as a result of what the president just posted. I couldn't help but start with that. But can you tell the folks a little bit about what the National Institute of Military Justice does? And then I really want to hear all about the Orders Project.
Okay. The National Institute has been around since 1991. We are a group of experts. There's about 100 of us, and we're academics and practitioners who all have expertise in military law. We are a nonpartisan organization, and we call the issues as we see them with U.S. military justice and its reform, and the consequences of that for military service and citizenship in the country. Now, as part of this, earlier this year, we took in a little side project called the Orders Project. This started 5 years ago. It has been pretty quiet. It's ordersproject.com. And this is designed to meet the problem because, Glenn, in the last 3 months, we've seen a lot more calls and a lot more attention to what we're doing. And what we're trying to do is this. If you're in the military and you have questions about something that are holding you back from doing your mission to its full potential, because there's something bothering you, either you're concerned that a command is not correct or something it goes against what you've been trained as right, then you feel like you need someone to talk to. It's not the command legal advisor's job to provide independent consultation to service members who have problems. They are, after all, formulating the military mission for the commander. They're part of the management. So when people are looking out and saying, I need someone to talk to, it's very easy to find some loud voices online who have opinions about what you should do. But the service members don't really have a way to vet this and authenticate it, and to know what is good information and what might end up getting me in even more trouble. So that's where, in a rather crowded space where a lot of people are wanting to join in and say, we're going to offer advice to soldiers, we at the National Institute, we want to lend our expertise and our credibility to be a source where people can call. For example, here's what happens. When someone goes to ordersproject.com and reaches out to us, they are going to get in contact with our legal director. His name is Treb Curry. He is a retired Army JAG of 22 years. He was formerly a military judge, in addition to being a prosecutor and a defense counsel. As a military judge, he was responsible for knowing exactly what the military law says and requires, what is extenuating, what is aggravating. He knows the elements that are listed in the military judge's bench book, which is how we implement those articles of the Uniform Code of Military Justice and what all of the binding judicial opinions have said of what actually counts in lawful and unlawful orders. So Treb is just the starting point. Once people go to ordersproject.com, they talk to him, and then we have a network of lawyers, all of whom we have vetted as being truly experts in this field, and they are there to provide individual consultation and services to people who have questions.
So let me ask you this, some of the technical aspects. Do they form attorney-client relationships with the people that they contact via the Orders Project?
Yes, they do. This is ultimately about the soldiers. We don't come at this in the Orders Project. We are not a political organization who express our views on things like that. The Orders Project is about the individual soldiers and meeting every individual soldier where they are. So I think that some of the outrage that has happened recently is because when people see say senators or representatives from the opposite party saying disobey unlawful orders, they may apply their own fears and to what this actually means. For example, that they're being told to foment an insurrection and things like that. The reality is a little bit more mundane than that. That mid-level officers, non-commissioned officers, they want to do the right thing. They don't want to torpedo the career that they've been working so hard for if they can. So ultimately, they want to get through a situation that has challenged them enough that they thought to call us in the first place.
So I am not a political pundit or expert. I never pretended to play one on TV. I'm a rule of law guy. It's all I ever did in my professional career. It's all I claim to know. But when I see the PSA put out by these six members of Congress, which seemed entirely unremarkable given what we know of our obligation, the obligation of military members to disobey patently unlawful orders. Um, and then I see the response from people who, frankly, in my opinion, should know better, like Senator Lindsey Graham. I don't know so much about House Speaker Mike Johnson, but they make statements to the public that misrepresent what those six members of Congress said. And they repeat over and over again, like a mantra, well, these six members of Congress told military members to disobey orders. No, they didn't. You left out the most important word, unlawful. So you can't really help. You can't read the politics out of all of this, even though that's certainly not my bailiwick, and you just indicated it's not yours. Let me ask you this: Have you? You said you've seen an increase in the number of calls to the Orders Project. Can you quantify that? I mean, is it an enormous increase? Are they still just kind of trickling in? How would you characterize the sort of quantity of calls you're receiving?
As a general trend, the last 3 months have seen a significant increase in our call volume and consultations. And not really to pin down exactly what this is, because we do a mix. Sometimes we're talking to organizations who want to say, we counsel soldiers on whatever issue, and we want to understand what the law of orders is. And sometimes we're talking to individuals. But and the two big areas of growth for sure. I think the reason why we've seen it in the last 3 months have been a lot more questions about National Guard deployments into cities and about the boat strikes.
So the National Guard deployment into cities is a perfect segue to a segment I saw where two members of the Illinois State National Guard um, went public, and they gave public interviews to news media outlets. One is a captain and one is a staff sergeant, and they said we will not obey unlawful orders to deploy to the streets of Chicago. Now, I understand that they can take that position based on the fact that the status of the litigation is federal courts have prohibited it by a restraining order or a preliminary injunction as of this moment. But as you mentioned a few minutes ago, Frank, these things are changing by the minute. So it does seem like a decision that a soldier or a sailor or a seaman, any member of any of the military services, has to make is fraught with peril. Because if they get it wrong and they disobey what they believe to be an unlawful order, but it proves to be have been a lawful order, they could be court-martialed. Um, so it sounds like that is some of what the Orders Project is trying to help military members navigate in real time.
Yes, I will say for the most part, these are not soldiers who are looking to make a public statement. In fact, they just want to stay away. Everybody wants that we have talked to, they really want to keep their heads down. They want to stay private, and they ultimately want to do what the right thing is. And I'll just make a point that I think, you and I have served in the military, and that we can appreciate that there's something a little different about the character of the U.S. military, that we are not automatons. We are not like the characters in Bertolt Brecht novels, for example, of just, unthinkingly doing whatever they are told. We believe in this idea of mission command. We believe in the idea of empowering even very junior leaders, 19 years old, to go take their guidance and apply it, and to use their own, discretion in how they accomplish the mission. So soldiers know, we give them general guidelines on what they can do, and so this is a very good thing. This has enabled our dynamism and many of the very positive achievements of the U.S. military, that everyone can understand the intent and go forward. And what this means is that when soldiers don't have that, when they don't have like a basic sort of meet the basic military standards, and they act like automatons, That's where the problem happens. People have been talking a lot in the news about the My Lai massacre, and I think it's just been the simplistic notion of, yeah, you have to disobey illegal orders. But what I really want to zero in on is this: Captain Medina gave what's called an ambiguous order: go get all the enemy in this village. And then Lieutenant Calley, who did not meet the Army's standards to come in the first place and serve as an officer, said, well, I interpret this to mean go kill everyone, right? A thinking person, and we must be thinking, is going to think, I know that if people aren't fighting me, and if these are innocent women and children, that I can't do that. So I'm going to interpret this guidance. I'm going to ask questions about it. I'm going to say, is there another way that I can still achieve the same objective or mission that I've been given? And that is so essential because it's at the heart of the U.S. military. It's a very good thing, and we should want to retain that.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Frank, but I think once Lieutenant Calley gave the order to kill everybody in the village to his troops, some of them obeyed it and some of them disobeyed it, if I'm recalling the Calley case correctly.
That's right, and there was one heroic example of CW2 Hugh Thompson, who said, "I recognize that what we are doing is completely wrong," and to his credit, because most of the time we just want to, fit in with the guys and gals around. He said, "I am going to do whatever it takes to try to stop this because I know what has Calley has ordered the troops to do here is wrong and illegal."
And it feels like we're at a point where you have to wonder if inside the military there are discussions, disputes, disagreements going on about whether we can continue to kill human beings in international waters. I've spoken with other military experts on my show here, and they've rendered the opinion that it violates domestic law, international law, the law of war, military law. There seems to be no legal justification for it. Even when members of Congress were expecting to be briefed and they wanted to hear from lawyers to lay out the justification, the lawful justification for these strikes, the members of Congress, and that was both Republicans and Democrats, announced that the lawyers didn't show up and they were not satisfied with the briefing they got. So I have to believe there are robust discussions and perhaps disagreements going on inside the military. But let me ask you this. Have you heard of any instances where soldiers or sailors, seamen have disobeyed orders and have been punished for that decision? Or have we not reached that point yet as far as you know?
Well, it often does not come to this, but often I'll give some examples. For example, we practice and we build our expertise and we do the things, so that when we have to do it for real, that we are very familiar and we have good habits for it. And we have had some calls from people who have been participants in the process for some of these boat strikes. They have rendered their opinions, applying their expertise and weighed in. And these are not commanding officers who could say, we're not doing this. They were merely providing staff advice. And so everyone accepts that they're not vetoing the mission. But what has happened is they've gone back and said, no, we want a clean slate on this. We don't want any non-concurs among the staff participants up to the approval. You really need to do better next time. So they're facing pressure. This might be someone who is an ambitious officer and was likely to be rated, the best out of 20 officers there. And they're finding themselves disfavored, viewed as not a team player, and feeling pressure to get in line when they're, applying their expertise to say, this does not meet the standards by which in my area that we can go ahead and approve this mission.
Yeah. Nobody said loyalty to the Constitution was always going to be easy, but it is non-negotiable. As much as I understand the pressures, when I hear the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, wanting to cut out Army JAGs because I think he used the term that they can be an obstacle to what he believes the military should accomplish. And he uses terms like maximum lethality. It feels like his mantra is perhaps maximum lethality with minimum legality. And so I'm troubled at every turn by what I see from this administration. And that is not coming from a place of politics. It's coming from a place of dedication to the rule of law and the Constitution.
And
So
Glenn,
go ahead, please.
just in on that, the irony there is that some of these JAGs, for example, the JAG who was fired, Lieutenant General Joe Berger, a month before that, he had just written an article that said, "Commanders, you got to make these calls, be decisive. You can go do these things, and don't be so timid." He was the ultimate warrior's legal advisor. People who can really effectively do their jobs are ones who know, I understand, I'm fully informed on this, and I'm super clear on exactly what I'm doing. When we gutted the JAGs, that not only sent a chilling effect through the JAG Corps, it put military legal advisors off their balance. And those are often the people who help to enable people to do their mission, to act decisively and to use lethal force with confidence.
So, is there anything else you want to add before I ask you to sort of slowly and methodically set out for people exactly where and how they can find the Orders Project?
I think that's it. We are ordersproject.com. I think everything you can find from is there, and then you'll be eventually put in touch with Treb Curry, our retired military judge, and from there, maybe you can talk to Treb, and that's it. But from there, we have a network of lawyers, all of whom meet our standards for expertise, so that people can know that they are at least getting a take that's consistent with military law.
So let me say, Frank, thank you for your military service, and thank you for the service you continue to provide to our military members, who we honor, we respect, we revere, and who I believe are being put in an impossibly difficult situation based on some of what they're being asked to do. How about you? Where can people find you? You're here on Substack because that's how we're doing this chat today. But is there any place else where people can find your work?
Yes, I'm a law professor in Mississippi. You can read my articles on military law at SSRN and Google my name. And we also have a website for the National Institute of Military Justice. There are also two blogs. If you want to keep up on the current military law issues of the day, we run two blogs. One is called CAFLog, looking at military justice developments in the United States. If you want to stay current on what the military courts are saying, and they take on many issues of orders, go to CAFLog. The other one is if you want to see what the rest of the world is doing, we have another website with regular developments every day called Global Military Justice Reform Blog.
That's great to know. I will be going to those sources. I think back fondly on my days when I was arguing cases in front of what was called COMA, the Court of Military Appeals. Now, of course, is called USACAF, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces. I went on to argue in both the local appellate court in D.C., the DCCA, and the Federal District Court of Appeals. I don't think I ever enjoyed arguments more than the ones that I was honored to do in front of the Court of Military Appeals, including one I got to do up at West Point when COMA was doing its road show. And I got to do it in front of all the cadets in that big auditorium. So it is a remarkable bench. It is the most civil, cordial, thoughtful group. And I know the judges have changed over since I was arguing there, but there is, I always am the biggest advocate for and fan of the military justice system in the Army, which is what I know most directly, because people may have this misperception that it doesn't sort of fully and fairly protect the rights of the accused, which is what we call the defendant. In my experience, it is a wonderful system of justice that protects the rights of the accused and then some. In some ways, I believe even better than the civilian systems of justice that I've worked in. So that's just my plug for the system as a whole. And Frank, I want to thank you for jumping on. I hope you'll be willing to come back as issues develop in this area, and we will make sure we get the word out about the Orders Project far and wide, because it is so important at this moment in our nation's history. So thank you for doing that.
Well, thanks so much, Glenn.